Welcome to the Maverick Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Rose. And as always, I like to begin with a big shout out to all the free spirits, the independent thinkers, the Mavericks walking their unique path. Welcome and thanks for the listen. Today we have a great guest, astrologer Hiroki Niizato. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a brilliant astrologer. And we have the task of interpreting the horoscope of a maverick politician. So stay tuned. This is going to be interesting. Come on board, Hiroki. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is going to be fun. Let us begin by just doing a little bit of an overview of what we're going to try to accomplish today. And I want to say to all the listeners here that I am going to do something different and offer a slideshow. Now, there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast on the streaming services, audio only. So you'll still be able to understand what's happening, even if you don't see the slideshow. But you can always tune in to the YouTube version if you want to see it. So we're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., presidential candidate right now. And I'll explain why in a moment. But first, I guess let me just say that as a disclaimer, Hiroki and I are going to do this minus the political opinion, minus snarky comments, minus anything that steps away from objectivity. We're going to do our very best to just be objective. Our interpretation of RFK does not say we endorse this candidate or not. We're just going to look at the astrology because he's a maverick. Okay. And let me say one more thing. Hiroki is a great astrologer. He has a wonderful website. You can check him out at HNIIZATO.com. We'll put that on screen for the people who are watching this on YouTube. Okay, you ready?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So we have an incredible maverick here. Hiroki, before we did this, had you done much research on RFK?
No, to be honest, no, I haven't really paid too much attention to him. But yeah, since you've approached me about him, I've been able to read about his story, which is very, very interesting. And, the shifts and turns his career took, over the course of maybe 20, 30 years. So yeah, I think, this maverick archetype is also something interesting to discuss maybe before we jump into Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s specific journey. Maybe we do that here a little bit, and then we can start talking about him. So the Maverick is, it's like I think it's an archetype in itself. And when we hear the words, we think of people like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, people that are making waves. And from an astrologer's perspective, we look for common signatures in these type of interesting individuals that are leading the changes in the society. And from a symbolism perspective, I think there's a strong Uranian component, the planet Uranus, which is the desire for freedom from rules or tendency to just resist control. There's usually a need to drive change. They don't just accept the status quo. So that is a big driver of the maverick personality. Also, this is the reason why these people tend to create strong reactions in people, because they are challenging the status quo mindset.
Mm-hmm. Questioning authority, asking why. Yeah. Why does it need to be this way? The interesting thing about the maverick is it's not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is finding the freedom to stay original, to retain original thinking, and to not be absorbed into the groupthink, so to speak. It's not a naturally obedient place to be.
So this is obviously a very strong Uranian component in it, but also I think what distinguishes this personality is the Neptunian component. So it's not just the rebelling portion, but there is a big picture or big vision usually present when the Maverick becomes very successful in what they're trying to achieve. So the Neptunian part is that focus on the ideal or the big picture and trying to achieve what hasn't been achieved before. So in the best case, this is the archetype of a visionary. And combining the Uranian and the Neptunian components successfully, then they become somebody that that can inspire a lot of people. So when we study charts of famous Maverick type entrepreneurs or leaders, then you tend to find these two planets pretty active in their natal chart.
One of the things I usually say about Maverick personalities is that Mavericks tend to operate as a tribe of one, as opposed to entering the larger tribal mentality. And interestingly enough, I mean, I'm a Maverick and I relate to this completely. But later in this slideshow, I'm going to show a quote from RFK, a recent quote where he mentioned the tribal component, stepping away from the tribal view. And I heard him say that. And of course, I was cheering, going, yep, that's exactly what I say about Mavericks. And he illustrated it so perfectly. So we're going to do this chart interpretation. Now we have to say right off the bat at this point, what we're going to show you next is his chart. And there is no birth time for this man. He has not disclosed his birth time. Now the other Kennedys have, not necessarily his children, nor all of his brothers and sisters, but the other political Kennedys, we have their birth time, but we do not for him. And I think that's fascinating being a Maverick. Somehow, some way, I'm going to put out this cosmic thought that somebody asks him to please provide the birth time and we get it shortly because it'll be fascinating. So let's go on and look at his chart. And for those of you who are watching or listening, specifically those of you who are watching, obviously, you cannot look at the angles in this chart. If you know enough about astrology, ignore the angles, because without a birth time, we don't know the ascendant, we don't know the midheaven. Ignore the house placements, because that's entirely dependent on birth time. If you're a trained astrologer, then you're going to look at this and you're going to factor that in. This is a sunrise chart, just simply because that's what I choose to do for no birth time. But it's really easy to slip into thinking about the houses and the angles. We have to ignore that for this chart. So we're going to be looking at the basic statements. And that's one reason I wanted to do this, because there's so much to see in this. So Hiroki, why don't you start off with basics of what you see? Because the next slide, we're going to look at the aspect structures. But the basic impression that you get when you look at this chart.
Yes, so we see the concentration of planets in Capricorn. I think that's an obvious statement here. For those of you that are listening, it's Sun, Mercury, Venus, all conjunct in the sign of Capricorn. So that's a big statement, usually around the idea of making things happen. This is a very practical orientation, the Capricorn. So that's one big statement. Also, we notice Saturn and Mars in Scorpio. Not quite conjunction, but I think Mars in Scorpio is a big, that's a strong placement. Mars being the traditional ruler of Scorpio, that placement has a reputation for the tenacity. Sometimes, this can be a very penetrating type of expression that can happen. And we certainly see this in the expression for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And then maybe I'll mention this later, but the moon in Cancer is a very unique placement here. And I think I'll have a few things to say about that, because that's not a typical Maverick signature. Usually the Maverick archetype itself is, they have a high tolerance for risk taking, but the sign Cancer itself is more security oriented. But I think in this natal chart, I think it means a little bit more about protecting something. So yeah, but I might mention that in connection to his social activities in a little bit later.
You know, the other thing I have to say about this chart is that there's a concentration of cardinal energy. So we have that grouping in Capricorn, and the moon in Cancer, Uranus in Cancer, Neptune in Libra. And when we see a grouping of cardinal energy, it is somebody who is restless, who needs to be taking action, needs to be moving constantly. And you can feel that with cardinal people, always moving something forward. If we go to the next slide, then we're going to talk a little bit more about the aspect structures here and some of the ways in which he manifests his Maverick energy. He started off as an environmental attorney of environmental law. He's very much connected to the environment, which is a beautiful thing, which then flows into something I want to talk about as far as idealism in his particular chart. So you're going to see on screen here that there is an aspect structure highlighted in red, which is called a T-square. And this is the grouping of Capricorn planets, Chiron, the North Node, Venus, Sun, Mercury, opposite the planet Uranus, which is conjunct the South Node, squaring Neptune. And it is, you know, it's a big shout out to the mentor you and I had, Hiroki, Noel Till, who brought forward this understanding about idealism, which Noel started off talking about the fact that when you see Venus and Mercury, especially in this case, conjunct the sun, that it's often an idealistic mindset. That's going to be echoed and reinforced by that square to Neptune. So let's talk about idealism in this case and how this is manifesting. If you have some words to say about that, and then I'll join in.
Yeah. So I think I would like to mention the development of this story so there's a very strong, obviously, Neptune component in this T-square, where Neptune is squaring his Sun, Mercury, Venus, and I think he had a heroin addiction when he was younger or something like that. So there was a drug issue, but later he became an environmental attorney, and then what happened was he started taking on large corporations and even like New York City about the environmental pollutions that they were committing, and then he worked tirelessly to hold them to account, and in effect he was very successful at doing this, and everybody was admiring his environmental work. So in a way, this idealism statement of wanting to protect public health, and this is where I was mentioning the Cancer moon as a kind of a protector type of instinct, where, like mother is protecting her children. So then in this case, he wanted to protect the health of the public. I think that in his narrative, I think that makes a lot of sense with this much idealism. So in a way, he was acting as the public health hero, the protector of public health. And then he was very successful in identifying unknown, like, chemical spills and environmental, long-term environmental damages that the large corporations were committing. So yeah, he inspired a lot of movements across the country to protect the waterways and things like that. So yeah, this is one way the idealism is manifesting as a concrete action.
It's also interesting, though, that Chiron is in there, because acting as the need to heal or the need to be involved in healing, his concept of Mother Earth. And here's again where the moon in Cancer can come in with that symbolism of connection with not only wanting to protect people and their health, but also protect Mother Earth, with Chiron in there and the North Node in there as his special mission to accomplish this. Fascinatingly, you brought up the drugs and the drug problems earlier in his life. His uncle was assassinated when he was 9 years old, the president. And then his father was assassinated when he was 14. So he had a lot of developmental tension in the early life. Idealism usually comes about when there's chaos, when there are things that are hard to explain. And then the child develops this structure of an idealistic place to go in their mind where everything is organized and everything is clear. So we can see the tension that happened early in life. Interestingly, you mentioned the drugs. After his uncle and father were assassinated, he went to a boarding school. He was kicked out of 2 boarding schools early in life. Mostly because of drugs. And at that point, I think it was weed. In 1970, he was arrested for weed. In 1983, he was arrested for heroin, and he was sentenced to a 2-year treatment program. And I think that started to clear it up at that point. Certainly, that's a manifestation potentially of Neptune. And the Uranus opposition here comes in. And it says, I'm not going to do things like everybody else does. I'm going to agitate things. And there's also this profound need for adventure that comes in with that.
So I think it was around the late 1990s, at the height of his successful environmental law career. It's around this time he started to attract the notice of kind of vaccine skeptic groups, mainly composed of parents who felt their children were injured by vaccines, and they felt that a lot of developmental disorders, including autism in children, might be caused by the vaccines. So because Kennedy was so successful as the defender of public health, so I think that was a kind of a natural progression or a natural attraction from those group who felt that somehow the pharmaceutical corporations might be injuring the health of their children. So he started doing his own research at that point, and then this is where the anti-vaccine angle starts to enter into his story.
Yes, and we're going to develop this in a moment. So he started the Children's Health Defense, which is questioning the safety of vaccines. Now, it's fascinating because if you do research on him on Wikipedia says he's an anti-vaxxer, that he's a conspiracy theorist, and it's very declarative. I like to stay a little bit more neutral, and because he will say in interviews he's not an anti-vaxxer, but that he questions the safety of vaccines. Now, it just depends on your view on this. But he does rock the boat in that, and we're going to show more about this in a second, about when that began. But here in these issues, we see the energy of Mars in Scorpio and Saturn in Scorpio. And Mars in Scorpio is like a pit bull that grabs hold of something and will not let go. This is the Mars that can move mountains. This is the Mars that keeps the focus, keeps a laser beam view, and it's very hard to change their minds.
Basically. This is an interesting combination, Kathy, of the moon in Cancer's protective instinct for children, let's say, and the kind of an aggressive instinct of the Scorpio Mars.
Absolutely. The passion, the emotional quality that fuels all of this earthy Capricorn structured, strategic, accomplishing energy. One other thing, since we don't know his birth time, I pondered quite a bit that if this is a sunrise chart, so we see in this sunrise chart, the moon is at 7 Cancer, Uranus is at 20 Cancer. If he was born later in the day, maybe 7 p.m., then we would see the moon closer to Uranus. And it could, I could easily see him with a Uranus moon conjunction in his chart. That's a possibility I could ponder and go, yep, I could see that easily. So let us look at what you mentioned, which is the development of his beliefs about vaccine safety. And what we're looking at here on screen, if you're looking at this on YouTube, is his natal chart in the center, and on the outer wheel are solar arcs set for July 15th, 2005, when there was an article released called Deadly Immunity. It was an article published in the Rolling Stone. And what we wanted to look at was this pivotal moment when his views became public to another level. So why don't you jump in, share what you're seeing about this, and we can talk about this.
Yes, so the bi-wheel is showing the solar arc for the moment when the Rolling Stone article was published. So we see here that I think it's interesting. Solar arc Saturn was arcing to the Aries point almost exactly, 0 Capricorn. Natally, Saturn is located in his 9th house. This is the...
Wait, we don't know the houses.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, see, it is so easy to slip into this. Thank you for illustrating that.
Right, sorry. Yeah, but so he's making this Aries point is the point of public visibility. And so he's making a large public statement. This is his national debut as a major vaccine critic. Okay, so and then that changed his relationship to the public, the scientific community, even the relationship to his family, who was extremely proud of his environmental work, but now somehow, this moved him into a completely different place in relationship to all of this. So yes, that's a solar arc Saturn on the Aries point is significant. And then the transits are also pretty powerful. The transiting Neptune is square his Scorpio Mars.
Okay? Yes. Interesting, isn't it? Wow.
We can...
And he's talking about potentially being poisoned by vaccines, and Neptune is a symbol of poison.
Yeah. So this is based on who is looking at it. It can appear very inspired or very confusing, right?
Yes.
And a lot of criticism was received from this article from the scientific community, and basically the connection of vaccines to autism was debunked, and the article was later retracted. But all of that is kind of a Neptunian sentence right there. And then lastly, transiting Saturn was opposing his Mercury. Sun and Mercury, but I think mostly exact opposition to his natal Mercury. So this is also a statement about his views, right? His views and what he believes. Yeah, and then
a power moment of what he wants to communicate, how he needs to think. What's fascinating too, for those who are listening, is we're gonna illustrate how that Mercury, that stellium in Capricorn, is so activated right now and has been for the last few years, and how major development seems to take place when Mercury is activated. Yeah. So we'll show that. But the thing that stands out to me so powerfully is when a planet arcs to the Aries point, you stand in a spotlight, something becomes visible. And the Maverick component in him, I guess, He had to flow with his belief system and put it out there. Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to put out a view that is going to rock the boat so much. You have to stand in your strength to be able to handle that, so that you don't crumple, so that you don't just get motivated to please other people, but you say your original message, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one other thing about his natal chart, which helps fill out the picture. And that is going to be talking about a few midpoints. For those who don't know astrology, please do not stress about needing to understand this. Just listen to the interpretation. But if you have studied astrology a little bit, you'll find this fascinating. Midpoints are points that we find that are the halfway point between two planets. And interestingly, one of the things that our teacher, Noel Till, really put forward was when you find the Saturn-Pluto midpoint, the halfway point between Saturn and Pluto, which would be at 0 cardinal, which is the Aries point, which gives a midpoint picture. AP, Aries point, equals Saturn-Pluto. Then we tend to find people who may have skeletons in the closet in their early life that come forward and affect their behavior. And when I looked at RFK's midpoints, I saw that immediately. So we think of his family. We think of the fact that there were 2 assassinations. We think of just his early life, skeletons in the closet. And so here he has, if you look at my cursor, the halfway point between Saturn in Scorpio and Pluto in Leo is 1 degree Libra. And the Aries point starts at 0 cardinal. Libra is a cardinal sign. And we can easily still feel the Aries point energy at 1 cardinal. So the orb, we can give it some wiggle room on the orb. These midpoints are independent of the birth time. And that's why it's so fascinating. So he has this aspect structure. And as I was doing research, I found a quote by him that was published in the Daily Mail, UK, that exactly illustrates this midpoint picture. He said, "I told my wife the other day, I said, I've got so many skeletons in my closet that if they could vote, I could be king of the world." Now, how perfect is that to illustrate this midpoint picture? Isn't that amazing?
I thought that was like so amazing. Because Noel Till, was the one that says, when you have Saturn, Pluto midpoint on the Aries point, you've got to ask about the skeleton in your family's closet. So,
but the other midpoint I wanted to talk about is Uranus equals Jupiter, Pluto. So this is talking about Uranus halfway in between his natal Jupiter and his natal Pluto. And this is interesting to me because this is the archetype energy of an athlete, somebody who's a mover and shaker, somebody who's very physical, somebody who's using that Uranus Maverick energy in order to expand and empower. And he's a very athletic guy. And very adventurous. He is a whitewater kayaking enthusiast. And I don't know if you've seen any videos about him and illustrating that even at his age now, what is he, 69, I think, getting ready to turn 70. There was a video that went viral of him doing push-ups, I think without his shirt on. Uranus equals Jupiter, Pluto, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that stands out. And what it does, Uranus equals Jupiter, Pluto, echoes and reinforces the whole Maverick mentality.
It's an empowerment of the planet Uranus, by having it between Jupiter and Pluto, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's also a master falconer. And that kind of fits into that adventurous mode. And the reason I'm posting this, and I found this picture, I always thought when looking at him with those close set, steely blue eyes, that he looks like a bird of prey. He has a similar look to a falcon or a hawk or an eagle. And so isn't that fascinating that he would also be a master falconer? Just interesting. All right. Let's talk about his health. Let's talk about the feature that stands out most about him at this point in his life, which is he has a voice that catches your attention. It's called spasmodic dysphonia. So doing research, it was diagnosed in 1996 when he was 42 years old. So let's talk about the astrological signatures going on then. Let me just say first, spasmodic dysphonia. If you look in the past for interviews where he's talking about it, he said he had a very, very, very strong voice. He had major public speaking opportunities prior to this diagnosis. And, there were oftentimes he could speak without a microphone. It was so strong. And then all of a sudden, age 42, his voice starts to change. It starts to quaver. It gets more breathy. It loses its power. And he had this diagnosis. This condition is a disorder which causes the voice to quaver because it's a neurological issue where the signals are sent to the vocal cords to spasm or tighten. So it changes the course of his life because here's this very public guy doing a lot of public speaking with family that had gone into politics. And when all of a sudden his voice changes, his path changed for that moment also. So why don't you explain the astrology going on at that time?
Yeah, so when he was diagnosed with this condition, then, actually, I think the exact moment transiting Neptune was conjoining Mercury. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, but the year prior to that, the Mercury was also receiving the activation from transiting Uranus. So this is 2 years consecutively, there was a major transit going on to from Uranus and then to Neptune. So that's the high, I guess, developmental tension that his Mercury was experiencing. I think the interesting part about looking at the astrology of this is that natally, the natal Neptune is square his Mercury, and then natal Uranus is also, let's say, widely opposing his Mercury. So there is an innate tension between Neptune, Uranus, and Mercury, indicating on one level there might be a physical component to the communication ability, a challenge that is implied. Although psychologically we talked about the vision and the innovative or disruptive nature of his views and communication, but on a physical level, this is an implied tension. And then it's fascinating that the condition manifested as a symptom, a spasmodic dysphonia, at that moment where transiting Uranus and transiting Neptune was crossing his Mercury.
And Mercury is very much connected to the voice in medical astrology. In fact, I emailed my friend Lee Lehman, master astrologer in the traditional approach, and it super specializes in medical astrology. And she said, yes, indeed, Mercury is connected to the vocal cords, to the voice, to that aspect of things that might impair communication. So it's fascinating, and it changed the course of his life. I would bet, had this not happened, he would have entered politics much earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would have changed things. So now when we move forward, recently, he had a surgery in Japan, middle of 2022. That's called thyroplasty. And it's when they put a titanium bridge into the folds in his throat. And I watched an interview where he said, prior to getting that surgery, he had tried many other alternative approaches, but nothing worked. And prior to that, there would be mornings he'd wake up and he didn't know how his voice would sound. Sometimes nothing would come out. And it was uncontrollable, and it was, definitely a problem. So he had this surgery in 2022, and he said it's 100% better. So the way we hear his voice now, in his words, is 100% better than it was prior. And look what's happening astrologically. The same planet that was activated when he was diagnosed is now activated again through the transit from Pluto, which is conjunct Mercury. I found that to be absolutely fascinating, that it would take this to the next level. And he was thinking about entering the race, which is why he was probably taking action to get his voice in a condition where he might be able to do that.
So Pluto, in this case, is a symbolism of, you could say it's a rebirth or empowerment, healing type of symbolism. So then his voice was empowered again to be able to speak on that larger platform. And then, of course, it empowered his thinking and confidence, probably.
And fascinatingly enough, this transit from Pluto to Mercury, of course, if you're at all savvy about astrology, you're going to say, oh, he's been under the frequency of Pluto for several years because of all those cardinal planets. 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, he was receiving Pluto transits. So it's been a long developmental wave for him with that. At the same time he had this surgery, transiting Uranus was opposite his Mars. And, he took action that helped. That helped the condition. It allowed him to enter the race, I think. I don't think, with his voice as unstable as it was, he would have been entering the presidential race.
Right. He would have been too vulnerable to his body's conditions. So I think that this helped him to, reach that level where he felt comfortable enough to, enter into this major challenge.
So then that leads us to when he entered the presidential race as a Democrat, which was April 19th, 2023. Now, this brings up something fascinating, because I instantly looked up his astrology, looked up his chart, looked at what was going on. And as we're going to see in one of the next few slides, I saw something with solar arcs that exactly pointed my attention to right now, which is October 2023. So we're going to show that in a moment, which caused me to want to do this presentation. So let's look at when he enters the race as a Democrat. We still have the same major aspects going on as when he had the surgery on his throat, which is transiting Pluto on his Mercury, transiting Uranus opposite his Mars. Okay, so enters as a Democrat, the long history his family has with that political party, and steps into the race. Did you have anything you wanted to add about this?
Just that the Pluto symbolism here is that of prominence. This is a very common way Pluto can manifest. And so the empowerment quality of Pluto, it magnifies the voice, transiting Pluto conjunct Mercury. And we are seeing this. Another word for Pluto-Mercury combination is persuasion. So this is the influence that he starts to have, or he starts to manifest in the minds of a lot of people through his entry into the political race.
And we have to remember this long transit from Pluto to all those cardinal planets in his chart. Also highlighted when COVID came about and the vaccine that was offered for COVID, and he jumped right into that conversation. And that has been a major talking point, major issue that he discusses, which then causes some people to call him a conspiracy theorist and anti-vaxxer, because then it became even stronger at that time.
Yep.
And Pluto was right there saying, okay, if you're going to do it, do it with intensity, right? So let's talk about, on screen right now is a bi-wheel with the solar arcs on the outer part of the wheel for now, the month of October 2023. And when I first pulled up his chart back in April, and I saw the solar arcs happening now. What I saw was the fact that solar arc Mars is making a conjunction to a sun. When I looked at it in April, it was still building. It is exact right now. Mars equals sun. And this is independent of birth time. This would be happening whatever time he was born. And so I knew, and I saw that it was exact in October. And I thought to myself back in April, let's see what kinds of major activation and change and strong statement comes about in October, because Mars is assertive energy, motivational energy. It is, action oriented, energizing his sun.
In the screen, there's a solar arc biwheel being shown, and we noticed that solar arc Uranus is at the Aries point, and again, so the Uranus symbolism is highlighted here, visible to everybody. But what I found very interesting about this is, so then the Aries point orb is about 2 degrees, meaning that the solar arc to an Aries point usually has an effect of 2 to 3 years. So the solar arc Uranus on Aries point really was going on throughout the COVID pandemic for him. And then this is the time when his, the vaccine stance, the vaccine skepticism stance, he made it very public. A book was published with his endorsement, The Truth About COVID-19 and all of that. So he started to gather national attention and criticism, but he did that, and then certain number of people gravitated toward his theories. So yeah, I thought that was a very fascinating statement to have that Uranus, solar arc Uranus on the Aries point as this development was going on.
For those of us as astrologers who love patterns, it is beyond fascinating to look at the fact in 2005, when that Rolling Stones article came out that put him into the spotlight at a new level with his vaccine ideas. And that's when solar arc Saturn was at the Aries point. Then it goes to the next stage when Uranus hits the Aries point with the COVID-19 vaccines. It's absolutely fascinating. But, when a planet hits the Aries point, if you're already a public person, then that thrusts you into public view in another way. And in this case, Uranus, it is with Maverick ideas, unusual statements, ideas that rock the boat. It's a way for you to stand out that is unusual. But the other thing that happened in October is that, and we'll go to the next screen, October 9th, 2023, RFK changes his presidential candidacy from the Democratic Party to an independent status. And this is a screenshot. I watched the announcement on October 9th. And at 12:33 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in Philadelphia is when he actually said the words, "I am running as an independent." And I captured this screenshot from the live stream that was happening. And so here we have solar arc Mars on his sun, and he is taking a very strong action step. I thought that was just amazing and interesting.
This is a solar arc Mars equals sun exact. And then this is the moment when he took this major action. So yes, the astrology is fascinating here.
He responded. And let me show you the chart of when he made the announcement. So what is on screen right now reflects the moment when he said, "I'm running as an independent." And of course, as astrologers, we look at this because the chart of when he says it is going to reflect what he is saying. It's going to reflect the event itself. So as we look at the chart for 12:33 p.m., October 9th, 2023, Philadelphia, we see the fact that, isn't it fascinating? He chose to make this announcement when Uranus in Taurus at 22 degrees, and he has, at that moment when he said it, Mars in Leo at 20 degrees, they're making a square. The moon is applying to a square to Uranus. And that's somebody who is making an authoritative, strong statement that is Uranian in nature. The Maverick statement: I'm going to rock the boat. I'm going to shake it up. I'm doing something independent. And he happened to do it on the very day when transiting Mars was squaring Pluto. Not his natal Pluto, but in the sky at that moment, Mars square Pluto, which was quite a lot of agitation. So as I was watching him make this announcement, I was listening and I was hearing statements that reflected this chart. And I was typing furiously as he was talking, because these statements that are on screen right now, the first one he said was, people can disagree and still respect each other. Well, that's kind of a Maverick statement. I say that all the time. I wish this were true right now in politics, because I am finding there is this pervasive energy where if you don't hold the same view, people don't respect you. You know, it's going on right now. It's unfortunate. He also said he is announcing independence from tribal thinking. And of course, I'm typing furiously and going, oh my God, this is so Maverick. This is exactly what I would say: independence from tribal thinking. And freedom from the reflex of having to take sides. Look at the chart. Mars in Libra, Sun in Libra, Mercury in Libra. Of course, this moment was building to the eclipse that happened in Libra on October 14th. Squaring Pluto, everything that's in this chart, freedom from the reflex of having to take sides. You know, Libra is about balance and fairness. And then he went on to say, we declare independence from the two political parties. And what will politics look like when it's no longer us versus them? And again, you know, that is so reflective of the chart that we see on screen right now. I'm sure you have something to add.
No, I think it's a Libran, like a Libran rebuttal of the, I guess, the polarizing tendency of the recent politics. It's also quite idealistic in nature, but
yes.
But yeah, I think, you know, a lot of people agree with this kind of sentiment.
So whether you agree with this politician's views or not, these statements he said at this particular time with the chart on screen reflect the chart itself, and it is just amazingly fascinating. But all of these are Maverick statements, and all of these are laced with idealism, very, very, very much. This chart could also be looked through the lens of Jupiter, because there's Sagittarius rising on this chart. He chose to make this statement right after noon. Of course, it's daylight time, but that puts the sun close to the midheaven, you know, in the spotlight. Interestingly, he was originally scheduled to do this at 9 a.m., but then it got changed to noon. I just wondered if there was an astrologer behind the scenes saying, no, let's have the sun close to the midheaven when you
worked out better, I think, astrologically at least. Yeah.
Very much so. Let's look at, on screen again is his natal chart. And I wanted to look at some of the future trigger points coming up since he's in the race. Now we have 3 candidates. Well, we don't know who all the candidates are, but 3 parties being represented in the presidential race for 2024. And if we look at some of the trigger points, I can say the dates that I have listed on screen are times when we're going to see more action, more movement, something standing out in some way. So I was looking at the fact that Mars is now in Scorpio. Here we are in October 2023. Mars is in Scorpio. And of course, it's going to advance and make the conjunction to his Saturn and his Mars, which is very powerful. So that's late October, early November. Mars will be conjunct Saturn and Mars in his natal chart. Yes. So basically, if you're listening to this podcast in October, this is happening. It's building right now. Now, what can we anticipate from Mars? It's called a Mars return. When Mars comes back to your natal Mars, it's just high energy. It's assertiveness. It's aggressiveness. It's taking a stand, especially Mars in Scorpio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. Then when we get to the end of November and then into February of 2024, between that time, Jupiter is going to be opposite his Saturn. And, one of the things Saturn is related to is authority and boundaries. And Jupiter is going to be opposite his Saturn. And I think just opening the door for him to identify the issues, the platform on which he's running. He's already done that, but I think it's going to go to the next level. And look at what's happening in the world right now. We're dealing with a lot of conflict in the world. In that time frame, February of 2024, another period that I'm going to be looking at is when transiting Mercury and Mars enter Capricorn and activate his Capricorn stellium. It's short-lived. These are called little bells, but they are triggers. And when Mars goes into Capricorn and starts popping his Capricorn planets with Mercury there at the same time, I would say pay attention in February because Jupiter will be opposite Saturn, Mars and Mercury in Capricorn. There's going to be something that comes forward with RFK and his campaign.
At least a major series of activities, because all of the planets in the T-square are being activated by both Mercury and Mars in a very close time frame. Yeah.
We can't say if it's going to be positive or negative, but it's activity. And this is how I look at this. I don't think there's a cosmic calendar that says the exact event, but there is scheduled activity. And we don't know which way this will go, but something will be coming forward. And some of that may be based on what's happening in the world too. Then right after this activation in February, in March of 2024, Jupiter is going to be opposite Mars again. Or Jupiter will move forward and be opposite Mars. So Jupiter will have advanced. And Jupiter energy expanding Mars in Scorpio. Again, this is a power point, right? It's a power move. It's passionate energy coming forward and being expanded.
It's just taking a slice and just looking at that time period, it's a successful movement forward that we can expect usually.
And then as we get closer to the election, assuming he's still in the race, assuming everything is swimming forward, which we don't know, but we can assume that, in August of 2024, Jupiter and Mars Jupiter will have moved into Gemini. I had a moment there where I had to really think because I'm so focused on Jupiter and Taurus right now. Jupiter will have finally moved into Gemini. And in August, Jupiter and Mars will be conjunct on his natal Jupiter. And I think that's going to be really fascinating because he's busy talking about his personal view of justice, which is a Jupiter sort of theme. And at that same time, transiting Saturn will be squaring his Jupiter. So we will see that Jupiter in Gemini shining at that time and his message developing as long as he's still in the race.
Jupiter return is a big moment, I think, for anybody. So I think this, if he is still in the race, then this will be his moment. And then, what happens after the election is over, it could be that this is the beginning of something new for him.
Absolutely. This presidential election in 2024 has so many layers of intensity to it. This is very, very unusual circumstances we find ourselves, especially because now, 3 parties. a three-party election in the United States is always fascinating and interesting. And he's coming in to shake things up. Absolutely shake things up. I'm not going to make a personal prediction about whether he wins or not, because I think it's very difficult to tell. I also know, or I believe, that the political machinery doesn't always reflect in the chart. The outcome of a political situation like this, an election, doesn't always show up in the chart. It
tends to be much bigger than the individual horoscopes, transits, or solar arcs. So yes, this doesn't indicate what happens in the election. But just from an individual perspective, I will be very curious to see, this, because of this Jupiter return, I will be very curious to see what his next big things will be after gaining so much. He gained a platform to increase his influence to a completely new level through this. So then he has the opportunity to do something new here, but I'm not sure what that is going to look like for him in 2025 and onward, but yeah, I think this is the start of something for him.
Absolutely. So these are dates for you guys to watch, those of you who are listening or watching this video. Late October, early November of 2023, and then in November of 23 and February of 2024, the Jupiter opposite Saturn. February of 24, very active month for him. March of 24, the same thing. And then August of 24, little pockets. And of course, these are just momentum enhancers. These aspects I'm showing on screen, momentum enhancers. Pops of energy and activation that move things forward for him. I think we've illustrated astrologically that he has the Maverick archetype, the idealism archetype, the devotion to a dream, the faith in something higher. Whether you agree with his stance or not, he believes it. That's the point here. That's what his belief system is reflecting through his astrology. So Hiroki, thank you for your insight on this. I particularly love what you said at the very end, which is the Jupiter return suggesting what's next for him on some level, whatever that may happen to be. And that's so true. It's going to be fascinating to watch this, right?
For sure. Yes. Thank you, Kathy. Also, I learned a lot from watching your take on his story and his astrology.
Again, if you want to contact Hiroki or go to his wonderful website and read the many blog posts he has in the articles, he's brilliant and it's worth the view. His website, HNIIZATO.com. And Hiroki is a big teacher in Japan. He has a huge astrological teaching component in Japan and is doing great work in the world. Thank you again for being on.
All right. Thank you, Kathy.
All right. To all the Mavericks out there, bye for now, and let's watch this ongoing adventure.